I voted for Donald Trump 3 times, saying we simply cannot coexist with the people on the other side. It sickens me to my stomach.
I think Republicans who say that the Trump administration is violating the Constitution through immigration enforcement don't know what time it is. The real threat to the Constitution is mass immigration. It is existential.
My nightmare political scenario, a civil war.
If they're really the threat that you believe they are, Walter, at what point do we decide that it's time to take up arms against our domestic enemies, meaning their frickin' neighbors? Because we can't just kill them all.
I can't coexist with my would-be murderer.
Wilk, you have been a Republican for decades.
Yes.
You support strong borders, believe in the purpose of ICE and DHS. You voted for Donald Trump 3 times, but you support him no more, in part because of his policies on immigration.
It's never been about Donald Trump. I mean, there's still things that Donald Trump is doing that I agree with. But the way in which certain things have been done have, in my opinion, been disastrous. Defining political opponents as enemies, the childish stuff in the hallways in the White House, being able to film federal agents in their operation, I think hugely important. Fourth Amendment, kicking in the doors of people with an administrative warrant, that's a serious no-go. When we start to play fast and loose with the amendments that are meant to guarantee and protect our rights as citizens, or as human beings, really, it gets a little scary.
Okay, thank you. Walter, you are a Minnesota rep, state rep. At first, you were a never Trumper, and you turned around. You believe that he saw the world correctly, that there is a civilizational threat, and his immigration policies in particular are designed to protect the United States and everything it stands for.
That's a good summary. Yeah, absolutely. I was not a fan of Donald Trump when he first came down the escalator in 2016. I came from a libertarian pedigree. I was a Ron Paul guy, right? In retrospect, I think there was a fundamental flaw in my worldview that Trump was reacting to. What I came to realize during his first administration, a couple years in, was the nature of how our institutions had been hijacked by a coordinated decades-long effort on the political left to fundamentally transform our country. It's the difference metaphorically between being in a peacetime situation and being in a wartime situation. I say metaphorical because we're not literally fighting each other in the streets, sort of, but not in a breakout civil war fashion, where measures are justified that may not have been justified before in order to restore the order and liberty that we all seek.
What do you think about the Constitution bending because we're in, from his perspective, a deep threat?
If the politicians who represent us decide that all it takes is an emergency to start bending the Constitution to their needs, they'll make everything into an emergency. The people are not nearly as divided as the politicians and the media would have you believe. The vast majority of the people are completely checked out of politics and not accurately represented because they see the ugliness that our political system now represents.
So firstly, you work in an organization that promotes cross-partisanship, people working together, cooperation.
Wilk is deeply conservative and yet works for Braver Angels, an organization that brings red and blue citizens together for dialogue.
We, the people, have much more diverse mindsets than just saying everything I believe fits into a box of Republicans or everything that I believe fits into a box of Democrats.
Of course, we should avoid tribalism. We should avoid partisanship as the standard operating procedure of how we do business in our politics. But there's a prerequisite for that. We can't have that nice thing because one side has decided to make it entirely tribal, literally tribal. They say things like, we need to dismantle the United States. As I was walking here from the train station, carved into the sidewalk are the 4 words, kill your landlord. That ideology that represents, property rights are illegitimate, we shouldn't trade value for value, that has a controlling interest in the modern Democrat Party. On their side, you can't be semi-normal and stay in office. You will get primaried. You will get crushed.
But it's not just the more extreme voices on the left. We're also seeing the more extreme voices on the right. In my own journey, I had a complete inability in terms of looking at my own political perspective and focusing solely on the other side. I didn't start to see things more clearly until I actually started spending time with those that I considered to be on the other side.
What are we talking about? On the left, what we're seeing is this tug in one direction away from our founding principles. As that rope is being tugged in that direction, the energy required on the other side to try to keep the center of the rope in the Overton window has to be equal and opposite, and actually greater.
The Overton window contains that narrow slice of viewpoints considered reasonable in a society. When that window shifts, as it does in every culture, once extreme views go mainstream, threatening the other side.
I'm not saying the Republican Party is amazing, it's not, but it remains generally concerned with upholding those founding ideals. Enabled somebody like me whose parents couldn't legally get married 10 years before they did in some states, right?
Just to explain.
Yeah, dad's black, mom's white, right?
Okay.
And so 10 years before I was born, they would not have been able to get married in some states. And yet now their son has been able to prosper and be elected to represent people. 93% white districts in the United States of America in 2026. And so when you start conspiring, which they've been doing for decades, to undermine our American system of governance, when that's your plan and you start acting on it, that creates the conflict. And it requires polarization to address it. We're either going to win or we're going to lose. I have to defeat the people who are trying to take it away.
There's a lot in what you say there, Walter, that I agree with. I, too, believe that the policies from the left are a greater threat to me than anything else, which is why I've never voted for a Democrat. Neither side can or should try to govern in a way that's completely dismissive of the other side. Obama was the first one in my lifetime that really governed in a way that was completely dismissive of the other side. And that generated the Tea Party, the real genesis in many ways for what we see now today in the MAGA movement.
For those on the left who believe Obama was shut down by non-cooperative Republicans, try to focus instead on this. Though they might be wrong, many Republicans believe Democrats started this autocracy-leaning division. They truly wish cooperation were possible.
When those that we choose to represent us in a way that's completely dismissive of the other side, that's where that pendulum starts to swing out of control. You cannot fix a problem with the same mentality that created it.
We're going to be talking specifically, we're going to ground this in immigration. Should agents be allowed to mask, to not show their identification?
That's the environment that they're operating in. They're operating in a hostile environment. There's no other form of law enforcement that has to contend with the level of disdain and complete dehumanization and delegitimization that immigration enforcement officers have to contend with. We know for a fact that they will be doxxed, they will be harassed, they will be threatened.
Federal agents need to be able to do their job as long as they are doing their job within the scope of the law. Anybody who doxes one of them or goes to their home and wants to harass or threaten needs to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Absolutely.
And having said that,
Barack Obama deported millions of people. His Customs and Border Protection were never covering their faces.
Yeah, the big difference there is that you didn't have the vast majority of prominent Democrat elected officials, from ex-presidents down to state representatives, saying this entire category of law enforcement is illegitimate. ICE out. Jacob Frey said, get the fuck out of Minneapolis.
Horrible.
That's a mayor.
Yeah.
Saying federal law enforcement needs to not do its job. Now, you say, and I agree 100%, throw the book at a person who doxes, harasses, assaults. As you well know, in Hennepin County, we have the lovely Mary Moriarty, our county attorney.
Yeah.
would divert the worst human being imaginable who's done the most atrocious thing into some restorative justice program to give them a 31st chance at being a good citizen rather than throw them in prison. Just go hard after the people who are doing this isn't going to work in the real world, because you need people in these positions of authority who are willing and able to do that. They're not going to protect ICE officers. So in that context, I can live with somebody wearing a mask to do their job. This is not a persuasion game. It's a power game. Part of the way they've wielded power is through mass migration. So they bring tens of millions of people in here to dilute the electoral map, to put a thumb on the scale of how our electoral politics turns out. You don't get to complain over this little grievance here or this little grievance there when we take measures to fix what you broke.
But the problem is, as soon as power shifts, and it will shift again unless somebody tries to cheat so that it doesn't shift again, but it will shift again. If we just continue on this path of you assholes did this while you were in office, so we're going to one-up you as soon as we get into office. And then it's a race to the bottom. It keeps getting worse. I've seen members make the statement, we simply can no longer coexist with the left. Well, I would ask what the alternative is, because we can't just kill them all.
You do believe that coexistence is not actually possible in creating, in holding on to American ideals.
I can't coexist with my would-be murderer. We fail to distinguish what we're actually talking about. So when I talk about the left, I'm not talking about every person who votes Democrat or every person who self-identifies as being left of center. I'm talking about the institutional reality. They have organized, just like the mobsters back during Prohibition. There have been votes that have been taken in the Minnesota House floor where I have watched members on their side of the aisle cry because they had to push that button green. That wasn't persuasion. Their arm was being twisted. By who? How? Money.
Coercion from the machine and having to push that button happens on the right as well. Donald Trump has set it up right now where there is no mechanism within his atmosphere by which somebody can disagree with him and not be considered to be either influenced by foreign actors or stupid or evil. He has completely eliminated any mechanism by which people can agree with or disagree with him in good faith. That is a huge, huge problem.
So here I will use the word naive. When you talk about Donald Trump wielding a heavy hand when it comes to reining in the cats, the herd of cats that are the Republicans elected to Congress in DC, damn straight. Because that is the only thing that's going to stand up. That fortification of our side is necessary to endure the wave of attack that is completely solid on their side.
I just have one question then. So if the institutional left gaining power again is then a civilizational threat to the United States of America, to what ends would we not go to stop them? Say, okay, we're not having elections in November? Or do we say that, you know what, Donald Trump is doing what only Donald Trump can do? So in 2028, do we say there is no presidential election? If they're really the threat that you believe they are, Walter, at what point do we decide that it's time to take up arms against our domestic enemies, meaning their frickin' neighbors?
If what we're doing here means something to you, subscribe. It's how we make more of this and how it spreads.
If there were a person from the left here, everything you've said about the left, about them going to whatever extreme they need to and bending the rules, they would say the exact same thing about the right. Exact. What we have are two views here from the right, which is the left is a problem, an extreme problem that basically needs to be defeated, not at any cost, but at many costs. And someone from the right who says the left is a problem, but the greater problem is our inability to cooperate and our making it us versus them. And the other perspective, which balances this, is the right is a problem. They're the ones who are the problem. And then you can see that the right and the left are responding to each other. We can't see that here, that the right and left are responding to each other as a perceived threat. We cannot see that here because that person isn't here.
Somebody using the N-word against me. They're exerting their power against me. No, I have to grant them that power. What power do they have with their word? None. Zero.
That's right.
Absolutely none. Unless I grant it to them.
Generally, at this stage, what I'm doing is undoing the damage that the debate has caused. Because generally, I have people who are enemies. In your case, there wasn't animus. However, people who are watching, a lot of them are hating you. People on the left, people on the right and left are hating you. Or disliking, probably disliking. And I want people to understand that neither of these people is a bad person. They're human beings who have been through the same junk as all of you, and maybe more intensely. I'm going to start with you, Walter. Tell me, more importantly, tell Wilk, what is beautiful in your world? This is what makes me live.
That moment of connection when you realize that what you're saying is truly understood by the other person. We're social creatures. Ideology of conservatism and rugged individualism that's often mischaracterized as a guy living by himself on an island somewhere. That's not what it is. It's chosen relationship, chosen cooperation for a shared purpose aligned with common values. And that's what creates the New York City skyline. That's what creates cathedrals. That's what enabled us to go to the moon. Even pick your favorite sports team or stadium. You know, why does everybody stand up and cheer when somebody scores a touchdown? They didn't do it, right? But there's a connection, and it is, I think, kind of a spiritual connection of having a collective purpose, a collective desire.
So this conversation for you, this is kind of what you are constructed for. Knowledge expanding, perspective expanding conversation, where also you're learning about and the person's learning about you.
Yeah. You know, when we first started talking and you were saying, I don't know, I've never had a politician in, I don't know if this is going to work.
Yeah.
I knew it would because that kind of core mission, if you will, has always overridden other concerns.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Same question for you. What is beautiful in your world?
My wife brought a beauty into my life. I had experienced so many negative things in terms of relationships and had so much ugly in my life and rejection and anger.
You described it to me, the deep, unquestioned acceptance that you both offer each other.
Absolutely. Walter's point about the beauty of finding connection with a person that we never anticipated we would be able to find connection with, and the beauty that comes along with that.
It's almost like not knowing you're about to taste the most incredible thing. If you know you're going to, it's not as incredible.
You know, I before I met my wife, I had been on like a several year relationship hiatus in that I had committed to the idea that I wouldn't engage in an actual relationship until I loved myself or knew myself well enough to know exactly what I was going to need out of a relationship. I could not be in a relationship being the person that I was then. And it literally was not until after I met my wife that I knew that hiatus was over.
What's interesting to me is that here we have two conservative guys who are talking about human connection. MAGA?
it's just such a wonderful question. Whenever, because MAGA has been abbreviated to become this kind of like insult slash dismissive label. But let's break apart the acronym. Make America Great Again. If you take it at face value and assume goodwill, what's wrong with that? What is it about America that is great? Beauty, human connection, productivity, cooperation.
There's this thing that our politics have done to us, and when I say us, I mean we the people. We stop connecting with the other side because of who we see they are instead of who they actually are. We exponentially think they are much worse than they actually are.
Oh, yeah. One thing about this show is that one of the things that's both attractive to people and really disturbing to people is that it explodes their myth about the other side. Some people really like that, like, wow, I feel much safer in the world, knowing that that, like Matt, the Proud Boy, like he's actually a good guy. And there's a whole lot of people who say that is the worst thing for humanity to sane wash this monster. In getting to know somebody, particularly somebody you're not connected with, it's really instructive to know what they find beautiful. Equally instructive is what they found the most challenging experience of their life.
One of the things that's been most challenging for me has been developing the kind of relationship that you described with your wife, of acceptance with no suspicion or defensiveness. And the reason why that's been very challenging for me is because of how I grew up. Black dad, white mom. They both were Jehovah's Witnesses, which is this really insular, exclusive sect that sees itself as us against them, them being the rest of the world. My mom was diagnosed bipolar, manic depressive, would regularly have what they used to call nervous breakdowns. She would have to be hospitalized. And she was the primary caregiver. My dad was working all the time. And so
And I just want to say, for a kid, seeing their parent go through that,
Yeah.
you're totally powerless.
Right, and it just created a space of chaos. As I became a teenager, I left the religion and had to kind of reconstruct my own worldview from the ground up. And going through that process, you become very, very self-reliant and apprehensive about the lion in the darkness, that's coming to pounce on me.
Ever vigilant.
Ever vigilant, yes, hyper vigilant. And so that's carried over into every aspect of my life, including my family relationships. I didn't develop or have any model for what a family relationship is actually supposed to be and how it's supposed to actually work and the affection bonds and all of that. The advantage is you don't end up dwelling a whole lot on somebody being mad at you because it doesn't matter to you, right? Like they can be as upset as they want. And the problem with that in the context of a marriage and a family with parent and child relationships is you inevitably must surrender some degree of your control. You have to. And you have to surrender your deepest, darkest suspicions, whatever they may be, about the intention of the other person.
So your vigilance has got to relax.
It's got to relax. And that's been tough. And it is manifest in some very disruptive and harmful episodes.
If I can add something, is that you don't just turn around and look at the other person and say, she's at fault. You look also at yourself and you say, this is my nature. I've contributed to this.
Well, that's where I had to get to. That's the only reason we're still together and it works, right?
Same question for you. Hardest experiences in your life?
Over a series of years and kind of hitting a bottom into 2009 in a series of a couple really toxic relationships, drinking way, way more than I should have. I got into a car accident. I don't think I had insurance, didn't have a lot of money, was living off credit cards, got myself into a lot of debt. The toxic relationship that I was in resulted in a fight, and I use the word fight loosely because I was sitting in a chair at the time when I got hit, crushed my orbital socket, almost lost my right eye.
And this is reminiscent of your childhood.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of things in my life that were always changing. We were moving around all the time. I was always trying to make new friends, and just about the time I would make new friends, we'd move again.
So there was chaos, like your life. There was extreme chaos and loss, constant.
Yeah, constant loss. I mean, yeah.
And anger.
I was remarkably angry. I was very, very angry all the time. I had very bad temper issues.
And so it culminated, it sounds like, in that time period where it just exploded your life.
It crashed. I made the decision to, after 13 years of living in Florida, sell everything, pretty much everything I owned, and move to Minnesota to help take care of my folks. And a few months later, my dad died, so I was left to take care of my mother.
As you've described it to me, you went through a massive evolution. And it was interesting to me because you put your mind to it, and you did, which I think a lot of people would find inspiration in. And a lot of us have tried to make that same decision. Yes, I will change in some way or another, and failed. So how were you able to succeed at that?
The reality is when I started to compartmentalize all the different aspects of what was making me miserable, the common denominator in every one of those things was me. I no longer allowed myself to blame others for what was going on in here and in here.
You described to me how important books and stories on tape were
Yeah.
for you when driving your truck, and that how important philosophy was.
So some of the greatest books that had one of the biggest impacts on me personally was A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl talks about his captors and the one thing that his
Captors being the Nazis.
the Nazis, yeah, and the one thing that his captors could not take from him was his ability to choose his response. They had killed his family, his wife and his daughter, and held him captive for several years, performing experiments on his body. And he would be laying there on the table in excruciating pain, being tortured by his Nazi captors. And the one thing that he said is, they can do anything to my body, but they cannot choose how I'm going to respond in my mind. If he, as a human being, another human being just like me, can lay there on that table and choose his response, then I should be able to as well.
As I'm listening to your story and comparing and contrasting it to my own, my mind goes to how those experiences informed our larger worldview and certainly politics. And there's something really, really powerful there that I certainly hope that the audience, if they're capable of divorcing themselves just for a moment from whatever identity concerns they have about who they think they're supposed to be, and just consider the value of what you just described, and that is agency, making the choice to choose, making the choice to control how you respond. That lies at the very core of our politics. What I think irritates conservatives about this historical injustice or the way my in-group has been treated, and you still have agency. You can still choose how to respond to your environment.
Huge.
Look at how your life changed by making that choice. If the world you want to live in requires a bunch of other people to do things, good luck.
It ain't happening.
Right. You know why I don't wake up burdened by the oppression of racism? Because I've made the choice that somebody else's opinion about me that has no merit and is rooted in an innate characteristic that I cannot change and had no control over is not worth my bandwidth. So once you make that decision that I'm going to embrace the liberty I have, even if I think I could have more, even if I think I am being oppressed in this way or that way, it's like sunlight in a dark room. It's not that darkness doesn't exist, but now you have a way to keep it at bay.
See, there are two ways that people can hear this. One is the power that you're trying to offer them as a gift to them. And the other way is a critique of them, where you're saying racism doesn't exist. Racism shouldn't be fixed at all. And you're saying neither of those things right now. You're saying there's something that I can offer that is more within my control.
And this goes back to the whole Make America Great Again concept. Sometimes you'll hear critique from the left saying, well, when was America ever great?
There was racism.
Yes, and there still is today. The reality is there was a moment in this country where we could all laugh at Blazing Saddles. And how is that possible? A bunch of different races all laughing at it. How is it that you were able to have Black Wall Street, right? Where did that come from? It came from the choices of the individuals involved to choose how they respond.
You offered me what you considered to be the most powerful poem that you encountered, which was the Serenity Prayer, which sounds very similar.
Yeah. God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Too many people surrender that space to things that are outside of their control, and they turn themselves into what I call a perpetual victim. And I take a lot of grief for that. This redneck may as well have a Confederate flag over his shoulder.
And I really want to make sure that the people on the left who are listening to this, they're going to think you're saying you're weak for giving in to racism, or they're going to hear you say systemic problems don't exist. And I want to make sure that that's not the lens they're hearing it through. You're trying to give something positive that you've learned, which is, even if that stuff is true, I have control over the way I react.
The most profound redirection I have learned in my decades of mediating is that a critique of other people can be framed as the speaker saying either of two things. One, there is something wrong with you. Or two, I want the world to change so that I can be happier. The framing that says there is something wrong with you is destined to fail in persuading change. The framing that says, I want this for me and the people I love, and here is why, has a chance of succeeding.
Let me compliment them. Maybe that'll help. I wake up every day wishing that my political allies had 1/4 of the will to act that the average leftist does. To be driven, to be active, to have purpose, right?
And to try to better the world.
And to try to better the world. To our points we were making earlier about there being a difference between the perception of how bad things are versus the reality for folks on the ground. Like I say, I go out, whether it's San Francisco or Minneapolis or St. Paul or wherever, I go into a bar, I see a bunch of people who all look different from each other, and
Nobody cares.
Nobody's inciting a race riot.
No.
They're just living their life.
Yep.
Where we been? You were supposed to argue in the first section. You guys blew it. Second, humanize you. And now it wasn't so much humanizing you to each other. I was humanizing you, I believe, to a liberal audience. I'd like them to see who you really are. And I'd also like conservatives to see you. Because I think that a lot of conservatives will view you with suspicion. And I think what they'll see is that you're who they are.
I would hope so.
Where I'd like to go now is to integrate what's important to you in your lives into your politics, and particularly into politics regarding immigration. I'm going to ask for one of you to speak, not some political philosophy, but at the level of personal meaning. Should ICE agents be required to clearly identify themselves when detaining someone? Should law enforcement be allowed to basically hide their identity?
In the ideal situation where all things are equal and everyone's doing their job and we're operating in good faith and in coordination between levels of government and branches of government, of course, we should have identifiable officers and agents of the law. Because if we don't have a pathway for holding individuals cloaked in power accountable for their actions, then we don't have the rule of law, we have the rule of men. That power, of course, can be abused and has been and is all the time to varying degrees.
And so masking sets up a situation where it could be abused. However, and then this is your other point.
So the however is, we're in a situation where we have to consider what is the higher threat. We have an ongoing, coordinated, supported by one of the two major political parties, effort to completely delegitimize federal law enforcement, to engage in what I would describe as acts of insurrection, impediment of federal law enforcement, which leaves them in one of two spots, which is very intentional, by the way. They can either not do their job. That would be an acceptable outcome for the folks who are orchestrating these insurrectionist activities. Or they can do it and subject themselves to the risk and abuse in terms of doxing, harassment, and assault. And regardless of whether or not you agree with the current state of immigration law, it should be deeply concerning that we would surrender to the premise that because people create enough disorder, the law should not be enforced. That is not how we decide things in a democratic
And that is a world which is chaos to you.
Yes. I don't want to live in a world where bullies get their way. Let's take it back to the civil rights era. The civil rights movement comes along and it introduces this concept of civil disobedience at scale. What is the purpose of civil disobedience at scale? It's to overwhelm the system so that the system breaks down, necessitating systemic change. Now, you can argue, and I certainly would as the product of an interracial marriage that would have been illegal back in those days, that the end justified the means. It's the whole point of doing it is you're saying, yes, I'm breaking the law. Yes, I'm not going to move to the back of the bus. The very nature of it is you're going to break the law in order to prove a point or make a political statement. It became broadly decided at some point that if you're engaged in civil disobedience, then the underlying crime does not matter and should be excused. So when BLM came to town, they had a march, they blocked the street, they caused a huge disruption in the community. As a member of the city council, and as somebody who isn't too fond of disorder, I had a few things to say about that. What I was told by our city attorney was you can't be out there telling people that they can't march on the road. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Why do we have permits for parades if anybody can just march in the road anytime they want, right?
This speaks to the degree to which order is important to you.
Yes.
And you see the value in civil disobedience, but if you're breaking the law, you still need to pay the consequences.
That's exactly right.
Because then at least you maintain order. So I just want to ask you to reflect back what you're hearing, the whole structure of it.
In a perfect world, what I'm hearing you say, Walter, is that you think masking would not be the ideal because there has to be a mechanism for accountability.
Correct.
That is where I am at. But the thing is
No. So what I want to make clear, I know this is annoying.
oh yeah, we're not debating. Yeah.
So I don't want your response.
Right.
In fact, I ask you not to respond.
Yeah.
I want you to
Just
get
just
it.
reflecting
I
back
want
what
you to
was
get
said.
it so that Walter says, "You got me, man. Totally. All the pieces and how they fit together
Okay.
for him."
Okay.
Because he's a complex puzzle.
In the perfect world, not being masked would be necessary. Without that accountability, you have a much greater opportunity for the party in power to engage in tyranny.
Correct, yes.
But the lesser of two evils in your mind is the idea that we will allow the masking of federal officers, which does stand in contrast to First Amendment, Fourth Amendment, any number of different amendments.
He did not say
He
that.
did not say that, but okay.
And he might not agree with it.
He might not agree with it. That's from my standpoint. From what I'm hearing you saying, the masking and the subsequent possibility of tyranny from that is less of a concern than the possible doxing. We just don't end up enforcing immigration law that are sent out to engage
And what
and
would
do
be the
these.
consequence for him if immigration law that exists were not enforced? And I don't mean from the immigration standpoint. It brings chaos. If we don't have officers that enforce laws, that are comfortable enforcing laws, if they're going to be doxxed and there's not going to be prosecution of that doxing, you're going to have chaos, a lack of order. And remember, for him, order is extremely important. In fact, it's more important than liberty because from his standpoint, you cannot have liberty without order. Is that correct?
That is pretty dead on.
There's been a clear pattern throughout our conversations today that disorder is kind of your nemesis.
I'm going to use the word spiritual. I think there's a spiritual component to this as well. It's the honor and dignity of those among us who are law-abiding and do follow the rules and don't engage in disorderly conduct. It is an insult to all of them.
And what I hear you saying in that is, it's not just about me. Listen,
You got
it's
it.
not just about my need for order. I care about all these other people. So, and when you say spiritual, what I think you're saying is my connection to them, my care for them,
Yes.
that is more meaningful to me than anything.
Mm-hmm.
So you're shaking your head. It seems like he's gotten you pretty well on that.
Yep. It's great. I mean, it's unusual. And so in order to try to stack the Legos in such a way that,
Where they're stacked internally for you.
yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah. I mean, most of us don't understand that within ourselves because we never even pursue that logic. We just know what feels right to us.
Correct. Yes.
So now, in order to have someone else understand us, that logic has to be constructed and digested, and it's very rare in all of our lives for that to happen. So are you willing to switch?
Yep.
Switch. Should ICE agents be required to clearly identify themselves when detaining someone, or should they be allowed to wear masks?
I mean, there's a reason that criminals wear masks is to hide their identity in hopes that it will help to protect them from being prosecuted. But the primary job of the government is to protect the individual from undue force and fraud. I'm not saying that every instance that happened during Operation Metro Surge was them perpetrating undue force and fraud, but in every case that they did, and there were cases that they did, the mechanism by which the officers can be held accountable is completely removed because their identity gives them de facto immunity.
And what's the consequence of that in society?
The consequence is distrust. When you give fodder to the idea that the government cannot be trusted and your fellow citizens cannot be trusted, we start to lose everything that makes a civil society a civil society.
And what happens?
complete disorder, Lord of the Flies, chaos, anarchy. The only way we maintain a civil society is to have trust in our institutions and trust in each other. The immediate thing for me is that my kids continue to grow up in a country that is, by rights, in my belief, the best society that humans have ever devised.
And you're suspicious of government, that it can bring tyranny if not watched.
I'm absolutely leery of government, and I know that it can bring tyranny. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I'm firmly of that belief.
And so masking is on the road to absolute power.
If a masked person comes and kicks in your door and comes into your home and takes away a family member at gunpoint, and you can't identify that person, you give fodder to the idea that that institution is untrustworthy.
So if you can reflect back what you're hearing, the whole logical chain.
We can't cross the line of allowing federal agents or any other law enforcement officer to conceal their identity, because that is going to result in the complete breakdown of the means by which we hold those officers accountable for their conduct. Because in order for government to successfully fulfill its function of maintaining order and enforcing the law, there has to be a critical mass of trust collectively that the citizenry have.
Has he gotten you on that?
Yeah. No, I think it's wonderful. It's one of those things that far too often is not seen amongst people who have differing opinions on things.
We can't even track the other person's logic when we're defending ourselves. It's just impossible, let alone understand why it matters to them. I want to ask you one more question. Under what circumstances should families be separated during deportation? Is that acceptable?
Of course it's acceptable. Anytime you are detained or arrested by law enforcement, that process involves separation from your family. I am actually quite exasperated by the fact that this is even
Let me give you an
topic.
extreme example so
Sure.
you can offer your reasoning. You have a family that came in to the United States illegally. They overstayed their visas. Kids have been here since they're 1 year old. They're now 11 years old, 9 years old. You have one kid taken to one place, one kid is still with their grandparents, and you have parents who are being detained in different places.
I'm still struggling to see the distinction between that scenario and a scenario where I walk out of here today, go rob a bank, get arrested, and am separated from my family. My sons didn't do anything wrong.
So that's an argument for consistency. Tell me what's at stake for you.
If we allow ourselves to concede this notion that so-called family separation is a justification for not holding people accountable for breaking the law, then that goes well beyond the question of immigration to, well, why do we put anybody in prison? How to put this? I care for the individuals and the experience that they're enduring, but I am not going to take responsibility for it because it's the consequence of their actions. That's what you're supposed to take into consideration before you break the law.
You've described this issue beyond the lack of enforcement issues as civilizational.
Yes.
And I don't think we've talked that much about that.
What makes a nation, what makes a people? There's just a body politic that is bound by a common culture, a common set of widely held values, high trust, and a sense of national identity. Out of many, one. But how? How do you get many and turn them into one? Not the identity of I'm a Christian, I'm a Muslim, I'm a Jew, I'm white, I'm black, I'm this, I'm that. But under the common cultural values of we believe that you have a fundamental right granted to you by your Creator to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, that you don't tread upon the rights of your neighbors or your fellow man, that you contribute, that you're productive, that you are responsible for your pursuit of happiness, not me, not your neighbor. It's on you.
So as I'm understanding it and what you've described to me before is that it used to be the case from your perspective that people who came to this country bought into the vision of this country.
Yes.
I'm going to work hard. I'm going
Yes.
to be responsible for myself. I'm going to respect others. I'm going to assimilate. I'm going to become one of them. That's what I'm coming here to do. Not that I give up everything, but that's my primary identity, one of them. And your belief is that that stopped happening
Yes.
a long time ago. Whether you're correct or not is another thing. But your belief is that the people who are coming in don't respect our system. They're holding on to their other primary identity. They want to change our system. They don't respect their neighbors. They have an expectation of being supported.
It wasn't that they were better people back then than the people who are coming now. The incentive structure was entirely different. It was the nature of what America was that necessitated, if you come here, you must be this.
Because there wasn't the social welfare system?
Because there wasn't the social welfare system, there wasn't the mechanized commercialization through public-private partnerships and NGOs to ship people over here and drop them wholesale by the thousands in the middle of American communities and then say, oh, gee, well, now we got to house these people and feed these people and clothe these people and send them to school, creating further burden on the taxpayer.
You've expressed to me that separating families is very troubling to you, that there are other ways to do this.
While I agree with what Walter says in terms of, we don't get to pick and choose how we're going to enforce certain things, this person very well could have a couple kids of their own at this point.
Let's say
they've
they
been
do.
paying taxes, their kids are in
Say they
school.
do. So what I hear you saying is that the policy of deporting people, irrespective of their circumstance, is too disruptive to human lives.
And I think the greatness of America lies in the fact that we are good. And I think the reason that we are great is not because of our might. America is, by its nature, good. Well, I've met these people. I've had conversations with these people where a person has been in this country their whole life. They don't know any other place. They might not even know how to speak Spanish. Their folks force them to assimilate. They have their whole lives been raised American. The idea of deporting people to countries that they have no ties or association to, well, in my opinion, that's very inhumane.
I see the wave function. Hey, Walter, wake
I know.
the fuck up.
No napping now. Oh no, the conflict. Now I gotta switch roles.
What this experience is mostly about, I would say, is perspective taking. The deepest perspective taking that I know how to lead people through is switching positions and having them advocate as the other person. So I'm going to ask you to switch seats. You are Walter. You're hardcore, man. You're MAGA, and you are Wilk. You work for an organization that supports cross-partisan conversation. But who's willing to be the other person first?
I'll go.
The goal is for you to embody all of his experience and his beliefs. Our experience gives us those beliefs, and the beliefs affect what's important to us in our lives, how the world gets reflected internally for us. Give us a little biography about yourself.
So I'm Walter. My father was black, mother was white. My folks were Jehovah's Witness. My mother suffered from serious anxiety, depression, bipolar, mental health struggles, which led to a fair amount of chaos that translated into an adult situation where I take it upon myself to try and create order where there is no order.
What does Wilk not understand about you and your side?
Wilk does not understand the true civilizational threat that the left presents.
So let's talk about immigration enforcement. What happens if officers go unmasked? What is the problem?
In a perfect system, in our ideal world, masking of federal agents would not be what we would want, because there does have to be that accountability piece. We have a system right now that provides an opportunity for chaotic actors to then dox and harass and physically assault. There is justification for masking those federal agents to protect their identity and protect them.
But I thought liberty was important to you.
Well, we have a breakdown in civil order that spreads, and it spreads that message of might makes right. It sets a precedent of whoever screams the loudest and causes the most damage then wins, and that kind of extreme disorder will infect everything within our institutions.
I'm going to ask you as Wilk to reflect back what you're hearing I know that's confusing. You're like, well, it's me. You're going to evaluate whether he gets it. And I want you to listen for what he's missing. Okay?
Where he gets what I just said?
Yes. Yes. I know this is confusing. And part of
It's Inception.
it is. Part of what is powerful about this is you will hopefully lose track of who you are.
I hear him saying that, sure, that's not the best idea under different circumstances, ideal circumstances, we wouldn't allow it, but these are less than ideal circumstances, extremely dangerous both to the agents and the broader implications for our society. We're going to allow this thing that we otherwise would not allow in order to try to tug that rope stronger.
Is he understanding you fully?
I believe, yes. I think that had all the major components to it.
Yeah, I heard him reflect it back kind of mechanically. And I want to know if you believe he understands how important this is to you and why.
Yeah, well, as a member of the State House of Representatives in Minnesota, you know, I have an opportunity to bring order where there's disorder. And there is that spiritual aspect.
What does that mean? That sounds bizarre. What does that even mean?
I can't explain this on that same level because that's something I'm still trying to absorb initially.
Let me help you.
Okay.
It has a spiritual component because order is one of the things that serves every other societal structure. You can't have liberty without order. And this isn't just for him. Yeah, it's important to him. Yeah, it's important for his family. That's what's spiritually important to him, that he's in service of his society. And so he takes this incredibly importantly. And to the extent that it's disorder, he is not serving his people. And I want you to educate him.
So there's an aspect of this that is so deep to who I am, much like in my childhood, trying to be the calm within the chaos. My job in the State House is spiritual in the sense that there is a greater disorder than most people even realize. Order is the one thing that makes all other things work. And if I am not able to accomplish that, then what am I even doing? This is more than just me. This is more than my family.
You're making the case that in order for people to get where they're going on the road, the traffic lights have to work, there have to be speed limits posted and abided by, and that if none of those things are in place, because the entire system breaks down, to try to affect that in as many different ways as you can is something that you feel uniquely and profoundly drawn to manifest what you perceive as your purpose from the time you were a child.
Yeah, I think that's better.
Wilk, I want to hear biographical. Who are you?
I've experienced a lot of self-imposed dysfunction because I was stuck in a space where I was very much blaming other people for my problems. When I realized that I needed to take ownership, that I explored through reading various books and engaging with different political philosophies and realizing how necessary it is for people to be able to see each other as people and to avoid this kind of dead end of getting into an us versus them. If that's how you feel about other people, then at best you're going to be dismissive of them, and at worst you're going to be destructive of their lives.
What difference does that make if they need to be defeated?
You're setting society on a course where conflict is only going to grow in its intensity, and the stakes of every contest, whether it's an election or otherwise, is going to keep ratcheting up. Past a certain point, it won't matter what's Republican or Democrat anymore, because it'll just be authoritarian. So that's the level of gravity behind not allowing things to get to that level of tension.
What I'm hearing with enthusiasm is if we are not seeing each other across differences and work in some type of collaborative effort, things begin to break down. And then it's not just a left versus right thing at that point. It's a complete breakdown of everything that we've come to know and love as Americans.
I think that's a pretty good articulation of it. And it's so vital that we preserve what we have and don't let it break, because there's no telling what's going to replace it. That's why I'm so concerned about the undermining of our constitutional protections when it comes to immigration enforcement, because a government that's truly of, by, and for the people inherently must have the trust of the people.
What if it has the trust of 51% of the people?
Not good enough. There's been no change in the law, but just because we decided we're going to start masking.
And that breaks trust.
Absolutely, because if they can do that, in spite of the dangers that it presents, then the question becomes, well, what won't they do?
I see. So the imperative to stop this feels larger than just this issue.
Of course. Anytime that you allow a violation of constitutional rights and it goes forward with nobody setting it right, bureaucrats win or the arbitrary tyrants win.
Yeah, what I hear Wilk saying here is that if we allow that, and now there's this qualified immunity for federal agents in this particular situation, what won't we do?
Again, I think there's even added perspective there, because might making right in the private sector, as it were, with agitators on the street versus might making right in the context of public trust. This is more dangerous than that, because what these people don't have is a monopoly on force. Mm-hmm. These people do. Mm-hmm. They can act with legal authority.
So you are much more concerned about improper police or government activity than you are improper private activity.
Absolutely, because one is historically and objectively much more dangerous than the other.
I can feel that as you're saying it, yeah.
Sounds like something I'd say. And I have said. No, that's absolutely right.
You have not said yet, Walter, why immigration is uniquely important. Yeah, traffic lights, sure. That we're not enforcing that, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Immigration is a little bit different, or a lot bit different for you.
Yeah, immigration takes the kind of chaos and disorder to a new level, because what we have seen year over year, decade over decade for a very long time is the influx of so many people that just did not assimilate, again, integration into what we have for generation after generation built up to be a common set of values.
What values are people bringing in that are different?
People taking advantage of a generous welfare state, overwhelming our emergency rooms and our hospitals.
How does that differ from immigration 50 years ago? Because you, Walter, believed that immigration was a good thing.
If immigration policies were followed the way that they were originally intended, and we only allowed a certain number of people to come in at certain levels, there was almost an implied way to make assimilation happen. But when you drop so many people into particular areas so quickly, it overwhelms the system.
It sounds like because we've coupled mass immigration with this expansive social welfare state, that's changed all the incentives, turned them upside down to where now people don't have any reason to become one of us.
Is he understanding you?
I think he understands it very well.
Thank you. I want you to switch back. We're just going to close out.
If they're really the threat that you believe they are, Walter, at what point do we decide that it's time to take up arms against our domestic enemies, meaning their frickin' neighbors?
You played each other. There are two parts to that. One is you experienced what the other person is experiencing, and that can have an effect on you. The other piece, which is independent of that, is you saw the other person play you. I think it's a really useful exercise, like going to the first segment, when you're listening to the other person offer their perspective. You're processing it through the anticipation of needing to respond with your perspective and fight back for what it is that you represent. When you're doing it as the other person, you're doing that same thing, but from their perspective. So it actually forces you to internalize their premises and, in a sense, make them your own. Yeah. So that you're capable of expressing yourself. And that's the exact reason why I have them reflected back. So what was that like? Confusing.
Very confusing.
Confusing, disorienting, but it's almost like having your own consciousness kind of take the back seat to this construct that you've created.
Being John Malkovich.
Yeah, of what you yes, of what you imagine the other person is thinking. But
That's really interesting.
it's also like a very instructive experience because I feel like now I'm able to take more seriously the concerns that you've expressed, particularly about the masking. Right? Don't know that I've changed my mind in terms of the conclusion of whether or not that's necessary in this moment, but I certainly have a much better grasp on the gravity of your opposition and why you feel that way. And it's not without effect. Like
And
it's
you
got-
embodied it.
Yeah. And it's got me thinking about something I wasn't thinking about before, which is where does the unintended consequences of that road go if unchecked and unfettered? And actually, how are my concerns about the other thing, the letting the terrorists get their way in the streets? That's actually kind of paralleling. And which of those precedents, if allowed to be set, is actually potentially more dangerous? I don't know that I've come to a conclusion on the answer to that question, but it's a question I wasn't asking before.
In every episode, identity confusion reveals that people's worries about the world are not just parallel, but nearly identical. If not for arbitrary circumstances, enemies might easily be on the same side. This makes sense intellectually, but when you live inside the other person, as they have done here, your view of them fundamentally changes, because the realization of similarity is not from the head down, but from the heart up.
Then what was it like to see him play you?
Looking in a foggy mirror, it's like I hear myself with another voice, but the essence of what's being said is the essence of what
So he got you in some way.
Yeah.
It's a pretty rare experience in life for many people to be gotten deeply,
Yeah.
but then to be gotten deeply by somebody who you don't know
Yeah.
and who's potentially opposed to you. What is that experience like?
It's encouraging because it goes to show that this is not like weeks and months of group therapy that accomplish this. This is a couple of guys in a room talking for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And to have had that kind of, you want to call it breakthrough moment in such a short period of time with relatively little effort other than just being willing to engage in the exercise, that's encouraging for the future.
So same questions for you. What was it like to play Walter? That's first. And secondly, what was it like to see him play you?
So watching Walter play me, well, there is a certain intimacy. It's almost, again, to use a word we've used a few times today, spiritual. It's amazing. My mind may not have been changed today, but I better understand that perspective that I don't have. And then trying to play Walter. So trying to do justice to some of the things that he said, I better understand.
You still see the left as a threat, just not the threat.
I see the policies
Policies.
of the left as a very big threat. But I think that threat can be worked through when we stop seeing the others as evil or dumb. We just see them as wrong, and we see them as somebody that we are going to engage with, as opposed to an enemy that we have to
Dismiss.
defeat and
Yeah.
dismiss.
I will say, not to ruin the kumbaya note that we're laying
Yeah.
on here, there are people in positions of power for whom that effective polarization is essential to their strategy.
It's their business.
It's their business, and I would say that's more politicians than not.
Fair enough. So my caution
Yeah.
would be that let's not get so enthusiastic about what can be done with this type of conversation that we imagine that
You can't embrace them. I call them enemy makers. They're people who profit politically or financially from having an enemy. They wouldn't exist without an enemy. They ain't going to change.
I call them outrage entrepreneurs and grievance grifters.
But my name's better. It's just that when we view the other side, not the leaders of the other side, but the ordinary people of the other side as enemies, I mean, they are just us, just sitting over there. Wilk, constitutional conservative. I'm glad you were born. I'm glad I found my way to you. And Walter, super conservative. I'm glad you were born. I'm glad I found my way to you. You guys were awesome.
Thank you very much.
hey, let's do this one. Let's do the handshake.
Yeah.
Slap. That's how you do that. That's how
This episode will be hard for some on the left. because no one represented your vision of the world. And yet I made this episode for liberals, not conservatives, so that you can see inside the other side. Shaped by life, by a realization that happiness is only within, yet a longing for the world to be kind. Shaped by life, by a belief that order must precede liberty, a spiritual longing for his people to thrive. As I look into their hearts, they are not your enemy. From my view, liberals are conservatives, conservatives are liberals on the other side.